Your coffee or espresso grinder has more impact than you think. Here are some key features to look out for before you buy. There are a lot of different coffee and espresso grinders on the market today, so how do you narrow down which one is going to work best for you at home? In this video, we're going to be looking at some key features to look out for when you're purchasing a coffee or espresso grinder, and we're also going to be showing you some of these grinders here on the counter with some of the features that we're going to discuss as well. So the first feature to look out for is going to be the type of dosing that the grinder has. So I have three different grinders here: the Eureka Silenzio 55, the Baratza Sette 270WI, and the LELIT William. And these all have a slightly different style of dosing for an accurate amount of coffee out, and I'm going to show you those here. So the Silenzio 55 has just a little timer on the side, so it's kind of the most basic timer. It's a potentiometer. You know, it's not super accurate, but once you get it dialed in for your espresso shot, just leave it there and it works great. The Sette 270i has, or WI, excuse me, actually has a load cell right here. It's a scale. And so when you put your portafilter on here, the weight tears out, and then you enter the exact number of grams of coffee you want. And if you're doing espresso at 18 grams all day, every day, having a weight-based grinder is a super helpful thing to have. And then the LELIT William is kind of the in-between. It still is a timer-based grinder, but you can set the time for two different doses on this grinder, like a single shot or a double shot, or two different types of beans that you're using. You can set the timer anywhere from 1 to 15 seconds is generally about how much you would need on this, and away you go with that. So it gives you accurate results and a little bit more fine tuning than something like the Silenzio. For anybody that's grinding espresso, dosing is super helpful. Whether you use a scale or not, it's nice to have a machine that can put out the exact same amount of coffee each time. For coffee, like drip coffee or pour over, it's a little less important because there's a little bit more flexibility when you're doing just a pot of coffee. But there are coffee grinders as well that have timers on them, and they work great for that function. If you do have a grinder that doesn't have a timer or any type of weight-based or time-based dosing, the best thing you can do is to get a scale, so that way you can measure the output, or if you want a single dose, as in put one single dose in the hopper at a time, you can also measure the input, how many beans are going into the hopper. But having a great scale for espresso or coffee at home is always going to be a good choice. So the next feature we're looking at, it's not technically a feature, but it is a really important part of grinding coffee or espresso at home, and that's the noise level of the grinders themselves. Different grinders have different tones and different volume levels, and they can be vastly different, even at the same price point. So right here we have the Silenzio 55, the Sette 270WI, and then here's the fellow Opus, which is good for espresso and coffee. These two are more recommended just for espresso. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grind about 18 grams, so a full portafilter for these two, and then I have the portafilter dosing cup insert in here. So I'm gonna start on the Silenzio. All right, well, you can tell it's dry in our studio today, but I don't know if you could hear it, but the Silenzio has like a really low tone. It's quiet, and you wouldn't wake up even probably someone in the next room with this grinder in the mornings. So the next grinder is going to be the Baratza Sette 270WI. It does grind quite a bit faster than the Silenzio 55. However, there's a bit of a trade-off because the noise level is quite a bit higher on this. So again, staticky, it's really dry here in Washington right now, so there's some spillover, but you did hear that grinder and it was significantly louder. The tone is more like, I don't know, it's like a blender from the next door over. It's kind of a higher pitched tone, and it's definitely gonna wake up somebody in the next room over. So if noise is a concern, you know, the Silenzio or something like the Silenzio, where it's an enclosed body, is gonna be a bit better than something that's so open, because the Burr is right here on the Sette 270WI, so it's gonna be louder because the motor is right there, front and center. So now we have the fellow Opus here, and like I said before, this is a coffee and espresso grinder. I have it closer to an espresso setting right now, just so it'd be kind of equivalent, and I'm gonna get that started here. The Opus is the slowest grinder out of these three, but that's not to a fault because as you could hear, it's definitely quieter than the Sette. It's just a tiny bit louder than the Silenzio, but the tone is still kind of a low tone. It's not super, super loud. So this would also be a grinder that you could use with someone sleeping in the next room over, or if you're in an apartment, upstairs, downstairs neighbors, you know how that goes. So the Opus is a great choice if you're doing coffee and espresso and noise level is of a concern. Silenzio, an excellent choice for espresso with noise level being a concern. If less so, you know, something like the Sette 270 WI, if you don't have any neighbors, it's actually a really excellent choice because it does grind fast and it grinds efficiently, but with the trade-off of that noise level. So the next feature to look for is going to be the Burr type and Burr size. So there's a couple different Burr types that are available in the market. Something like the Encore here, the Baratza Encore, is going to have what is called a cone burr. And then something like the Atom 75 here is going to have a flat burr. Now these two, they're kind of on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of price and for home use. So I wanted to show kind of the difference between these two. A cone burr, which I'm going to show you here, is effectively an inner ring that's basically a cylindrical ring, and then inside there's going to be kind of a cone-shaped inner burr, but both these together basically make up the arrangement of most cone burr grinders. And what that gets you, some people say it gets you a little bit more body because the grinding is a little bit less uniform than something like with flat burrs. And some people like that, especially in drip coffee or on their like pour over. They kind of like the irregularity to the grind just a little bit. It's not super irregular, they're still pretty uniform when you look at it, but at the microscopic level, it definitely is a little bit less regular, and that can give you more body and a little less kind of defined characteristics in the cup and just a little bit more of that coffee punch. Something like the Atom 75, it has flat burrs. I'm not gonna take the top off here, but basically what a flat burr is two sets of flat burrs, very much like a grindstone or like a mill. Then it's just gonna be two flat burrs, and in this case, they're moving like this. There are some grinders, like some larger commercial grinders, that they're flat burrs that are vertical, but most of the home grinders have the kind of horizontal flat burr. Now they get more regular, and for espresso, that's really helpful because it gets you dialed in a lot quicker. A lot of people find difficulty dialing in cone burrs for espresso. Some people don't, some people like it, but if you're trying to dial in just for espresso, a flat burr is definitely a big plus. You're gonna get a little less body out of the cup, but you're gonna get some more defined characteristics, and you're paying, you know, $15, $20, $25 even nowadays for a bag of coffee. You kind of want those tasting notes to come out nice and bright, and a flat burr grinder is definitely where you want to go with that. So last but not least, and arguably one of the more important features that you can have on an espresso grinder is going to be the level of adjustability that you're looking for in your daily coffee routine. So some people brew just coffee, just drip coffee, filter coffee, French press, and then some people brew just espresso, you know, a latte every morning or a macchiato. And some people want the best of both worlds. They want to kind of switch in between, and different grinders serve different purposes for that. And I'm going to show you kind of what I mean here. So something like the Breville Smart Grinder Pro or the Baratza Vario Plus are called stepped grinders. And this means that they have adjustments that kind of lock in at a very specific point and they don't change. So for example, on this Vario, a 1E or F is always going to be a 1E or F unless you do some adjustment to the inner burr mechanism. But every time you go back to 1E or F, it's going to be exactly the same as it was before. Same with the Smart Grinder Pro. There's a dial on the side. When it's plugged in, the reading will be here on the screen. And if you want to go to like 15 again or 20, it's always going to be exactly the same. And there are also stepless grinders, which are like this LELIT William here and this Atom 75. Now stepless means that there's not a specific grind point for reference. So on something like a Eureka, and this is true of most Eureka models, this knob basically just turns infinitely. You can turn it until basically the knob is coming off, and you can turn it until the burrs are touching. Now, this can be great for espresso brewing specifically because you can get it dialed in exactly where you want it. As the difference being, like on a Vario, you can't get in between the steps, but on the Atom, you can really get it to the millimeter, basically, in terms of adjustment. The LELIT is kind of unique, the William, because it's almost like a stepless grinder. So every time you turn the top dial, there's a kind of a click. So you are locking yourself into a specific grind number, but it can turn infinitely around, so it has the same infinite adjustment. It's just a little bit less precise, but also a little bit more reassuring because you kind of know where you're at on this specific rotation. The other thing about adjustability is wanting a grinder that can be good for both espresso and coffee, and something like the Encore ESP is a great choice. So it is a stepped grinder, meaning that every turn you can hear a click, and that's going to be that grind setting. And so this makes it easy to switch back and forth, because so if I turn it all the way coarse, now I might be ready for something like a French press or a filter coffee. And then if I get into the espresso range, Baratza does a nice job of calling it out right up here. Then you can do your espresso, and once you're ready to switch back, you kind of have that reference point to go back to. And that's really important because on something like these infinite stepless grinders, there's not a great reference point. We don't recommend these for both drip coffee and espresso for that reason, and their burrs are a little bit different, but generally a stepped grinder for drip coffee is going to be excellent, and if you can find one that does great espresso as well, it's going to be a good choice if you're doing all sorts of coffee during the morning. If you found this video helpful, we also made a video about different features to look out for on an espresso machine. So if you're in the market for an espresso machine, be sure to check that out.